I think that's been my biggest growth, is putting myself in situations where I need to be better and learning and understanding where I'm not good enough, and then just working really hard on making them better. At the end of the day, hard work is going to supplant everything you do.
Welcome to the Breaking Boundaries podcast, where we delve deep into the minds of the most extraordinary individuals. I'm Simon Dyson, and alongside me is Alex Clapp.
Our guests tell stories where we can learn from their successes and overcome challenges to inspire our own growth. Here's what will be coming up today. Welcome, guys. On the podcast today, we have world-renowned golf coach Shauheen Nahkjavani, who coaches many tour professionals from the PGA Tour, Champions Tour, DP World Tour, many other tours worldwide, as well as helping golfers all levels, on person and online. Shauheen, how you doing, my man?
All is good, man. It's a little earlier for me, so I'm just getting my day sorted out. But
yeah, a bit later in the day for Dyson and myself. Obviously, it's 2 p.m. for us.
Yeah.
So, Dice, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see the journey that you went through. So, from realizing you wanted to be a golf coach, what happened there, and then the journey to where you are now, basically, Shauheen?
I will say it was a pretty quick realization that I was never good enough to play professionally. You know, we don't even have that many really good players in Montreal, so you would think that, you know, I would be around them. I would have been able to pick up on that pretty quickly, but it was more just, you know, when you get to like around a scratch level, you have this idea when you're a young kid that you can make it to the next level, but then a lot of physical injuries made it really tough to practice as often as I would like. And I actually grew up playing other sports. I made it pretty public. I used to be a very high-level soccer player, so football player in Europe. And I had played for the province of Quebec, so I was like a very, very high-level player. And then I kind of gave it up just because I didn't think I was going to be good enough to make it there either. Was playing a lot of golf in my teenage years. I honestly hadn't broken 100 until I was about 19. So I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I'm in my mid-30s now, so it's not like it's been forever, you know. And I went from breaking 100 for the first time to breaking 70 within like 2.5 years with no coaching, which is kind of a little bit of a one-off situation. Like, it's very rare that I see that happen. And then I started to take the game a little bit more seriously when I was younger, and I actually tore my ACL and meniscus playing a game of pickup football again with some buddies. And that was pretty much the end of any sort of playing aspirations I had. And then on my off time, I always say that injury was a blessing in disguise, because I was in my early 20s and I was just tweeting a lot when I was sitting on my couch, not being able to do a whole lot. And that kind of just started picking up steam. And I started to grow a social media following from just kind of sharing some information online. And then I went from not teaching anybody when I was about 21, 22, when I had started this process, till working with tour players by the time I was like 26, 27. So it took me like 4 or 5 years, and I was already working with some of the best players in the world, which was crazy to me at the time to think that way. But it just came from like a lot of hard work and just consistency and like sharing information on the internet.
Is that something, so you obviously hit high level in the football. So then when you started playing golf, was that exactly the same feeling? Right, I'm going to give it my all, get as good as I can be. And is that exactly the same with your coaching as well?
I definitely think there's a lot of overlap in the sense of like when you know what it takes and you've been through the process of getting to a high level of any industry or any sport in this case. Once I transferred over and I had the same kind of passionate drive for the game of golf that I had when I was playing football at the time, I knew that it was only going to be a matter of time if I really committed myself to getting to a high level. You know, I like to think I was very athletic growing up. You know, I was in good shape. Obviously, at the time, I wasn't dealing with injuries. And I knew what that process looked like, and I knew how consistent and how driven you had to be and the amount of time you had to invest in it if you wanted to take it seriously. And we're going to get into this conversation later, but these are like the first things I ask players who tell me, like, you know, you hear a lot of really good players when they're young, they'll be like, oh, I really want to try to become a professional golfer. Okay, but what are you doing to try to become a professional golfer? Because it's not good enough just to have some fancy swing and like go out there and hit the ball a long way. Like, there's a lot that goes on around the game of golf that you need to be very structured with. And I kind of had that structure already instilled in me from the other sports. So I think because of that, I got really good at the game really fast. The funny part is I haven't gotten much better since then because I don't play that often anymore. But I think that just comes with the lifestyle of coaching. You know, you don't really have a lot of time to play golf anymore.
I'm definitely in your boat, Shauheen, where I quickly realised I wasn't good at playing. Dice is probably on the opposite end of the spectrum to us. He realised he was pretty good pretty quick. But
I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah,
you're talking about a tour winner versus like two hacks over here who just teach.
Yeah. So what motivated you, mate, to along the way? Was it just built in you through it, or because you said you adopted the same philosophy into your coaching as you did with your football? So
Yeah,
was it
I'll tell you how this started. It's almost a little bit like narcissistic to say it publicly, but I always felt as if I was one of the better players on the football team when I used to play, and I was always getting let down by the people around me. So it was something in my head that felt like there's only so much I could do, and then if the team's not performing, if I'm not standing out and shining super bright, no one's going to notice you, and you can't keep advancing your career at some point. And it's crazy to think that way, but looking back, I had a huge ego as a junior soccer player. Like, it was really bad. And I think that's one of those things that helped, because when I went to golf, you kind of realize really fast, like, hey, it's only on you now. So you have to do the work, but you're going to get paid off where there's nobody else who can kind of let you down, where in my mind, that's what was happening. And so when I went to coaching, I very much had that same attitude. Like, it's all on me. You know, I can find the information on the internet. I can share it. I can become a better communicator. I can become a better golfer. I can learn the ins and outs of what it takes to become, you know, a super high performance coach. And I know that there's nobody else who can bring me down if I put the work in, like I felt like I had already experienced somewhere else. So I think the fact that I went into something that I was very solo helped a lot, because it had come from a team aspect where that wasn't the case.
You said about the huge ego. Now, when you see that, do you look at them and think, yeah, you've definitely got that ego? Or is it all a facade sometimes? Because I genuinely think you need that ego to succeed.
Sure. I definitely think there's a level of, I don't want to say false confidence, but like there's a level of belief that you need to have internally that you're going to succeed when you're doing something. And if you don't have that, I really think you're going to struggle no matter how talented you are. You know, I can remember, for example, like the first couple of times I was doing public presentations with golf and like hosting clinics in front of a large group of people, like I was nervous. Like I had a meltdown, you know, I dealt with a lot of anxiety at the beginning when it came to that. The first time I ever held a clinic, I topped my first shot in front of 100 people watching the shot. And it's a tee shot, the ball's sitting on a tee. Like, imagine.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, it was one of those things where I think over time, as I got better, I started to train myself to, and I don't know if it was like I trained myself, like very publicly train yourself, but I just think I had to internalize a lot more confidence that maybe it wasn't necessarily there, and it was a facade, to like the whole idea of fake it till you make it, to a point where you just start to believe in yourself a lot, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter. It's no different than like, and I'll relate it to you and then even to Alex, like the first time you go onto a tour driving range, like with a bunch of pro golfers around you, the first time I did it from the coaching side, I really felt like I didn't belong there. And it's one of those things where I grew up as like a Muni kid. I wasn't a country club guy. I didn't have a lot of money where I was around really good players all the time. So it was a very uncomfortable setting. Like you walk in and people are asking, like waiting on your hand and foot to help you out. Oh, do you need this? You know, here are water bottles here. There's food there if you want to go eat free dining. Like those little things, when you're not used to it, is very uncomfortable. It's like you don't really know what to do with yourself, you know? And then it was, I could remember like going and sitting in the lounge and honestly being worried, like, am I going to sit in the wrong seat where like in my mind, like a better coach, let's say at the time, or somebody who was more prominent is going to come in and be like, yo, get the F out of my seat kind of thing. You know? That's kind of the mentality I had, and I felt very uncomfortable. And I honestly think it affected my performance when I was even coaching. Like I'm always looking over my shoulder, making sure I'm not standing in someone's line and stuff. Now it's, you know, 8-9 years I'm working with tour players. I don't have that sensation anymore. Obviously my confidence has gotten a lot stronger, and I do feel a sense of belonging to some degree, but that wasn't always the case. And I think that as my confidence got better and your ego got better, like you're able to perform better too, for sure.
I mean,
yeah,
for me, sounds like a clear obstacle in terms of imposter syndrome, and something that a lot of people suffer from immensely. But overcoming that is, in my opinion, very key to just pushing on to that next level, that next goal, that next aspiration.
And you know what? As strong as my technical knowledge of the golf swing has gotten over the years, because I do believe like that's where my strength is for sure. I think that I've become a far better coach in terms of my personality, my communication, that confidence. That part has grown 10 times more than my technical knowledge has grown over that same period. And I think I've become a better coach because of that. And honestly, some of my players have even told me that too. Like, I've been fortunate enough to work with some of these tour players for like 4, 5, 6 years now. And even they tell me, like, as strong as my technical stuff is or feels, I'm sharing a lot of similar information over 4 or 5 years with them, because it's not like we're reinventing the wheel here. But, the way I've communicated with them, the way I've treated those tournament weeks, the way I'm just acting around them has changed immensely.
So you talk about working with the tour players.
Yeah.
What is it that stands them aside from the guys who nearly make it? What do you think it is?
I think a lot of it has to do with, number one, having the right team around you. Honestly, I think there's a lot of external stuff that's involved. I see like parents that are overbearing, that are trying to jump in way too often, trying to like, I have had, and I'm sure every single coach has been through this, but like I've had the misfortune every once in a while to run into like just a very overbearing parent, where you're sharing certain information with your player on what you would like them to do, and you can create all the program and structure you want for them. But if the second you're no longer in the picture, when they're going off with the parent, whether to tournaments or practice or whatever, and they're going to just share a lot of information above you. And then obviously if you're somebody, are you going to listen to your parent or the stranger? Like, it's very easy to make a decision to listen to your parent in that situation, especially if you're not the one even paying for the service, right? It makes it even easier. And it ends up becoming a theme where you never really quite get through to them as well as you would like. And it is a small part of it, but at this level, it's such a fine line that every little small part of it makes such a big difference in whether a player is going to succeed or not. And I'm kind of dealing with that with a couple of players now too, where, there's going to be parents that are just going to be a little too intense with their children, where I don't think they belong in that conversation as much as they are. I think a lot of it has to do with the players' straight up just drive and willingness to practice. And at the end of the day, if you want to make it, the one thing I've learned, you have to sacrifice in certain areas. It's a game where if you want to be the top 1% of 1% of 1% in an industry, well, by definition, that means you're going to be very average to below average in a lot of other things in your life. Sucks to say that, but it's true. You see people where, yeah, they have all the talent in the world, but then they go home and they're not practicing. They're not looking at how they can get better. They're not keeping track of their stats. All of these little things make such a big difference at that level. And when players kind of take the lazy route, and I almost see this more often with players who are really, really talented because they feel like it was so easy for them growing up that it's just going to stay that way forever. But then you walk onto a driving range and you're no longer practicing with a bunch of +3s and 4s, but you have Rory standing in front of you like, yeah, good luck. You're going to probably have to work a little harder to keep up with him, and there's always going to be outliers where they can get away with not practicing as often. That's the same for every industry, but man, those are few and far in between. And if you're not one of those very, very, very fortunate players, like, you got to put the work in. And I find that as you get to the better and better levels, because the competition gets harder and harder, if you're not keeping up with what you're doing, you're going to fall behind really fast.
Yeah, and for me as well, falling behind and making sure you stay at the forefront of what you're trying to do are crucial, obviously, to staying at the top. So when you work with your players and when you do stuff by yourself to work on your own growth as an individual in your coaching, taking a couple notables of your players that are doing awesome at the moment. Obviously, you got Yannick Paul, you got Stephen Ames, Kev Chappell, who I seen you started working with recently.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit of your journey with them? Because I know Yannick obviously was super close to making the Ryder Cup team this year, and for me, deserved a lot more credit than what potentially he got given from a lot of plaudits.
Very good player.
Your journey with Stephen a bit. Share a bit of that with us, mate.
Yeah, so I will say this about Yannick. Like, our main goal the whole year was always just to try to get himself in the top 10 for the PGA Tour card. It's very clear that if you're in Europe, you're going to want to make the jump over. There's more world ranking points and there's more money and so on. It's a pretty easy decision. So the Ryder Cup was always kind of a bonus. He wasn't really in the conversation until he had a couple of runner-up finishes back-to-back this year, and it kind of vaulted him up the standings. But when, Yannick even said it himself publicly, like, when you're in the conversation for 90% of the year, And then you get to the last 2 weeks and you're seeing like thousands and thousands of publications online on what they think the team should be. And he's not mentioned in a single one of those lists. It's almost like a massive insult to how good of a player he is. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's second in strokes gained approach this year on the European Tour. He's one of the best ball strikers on the planet. If he literally just putts average, he contends in every single tournament. It's almost like the old thing that they used to say about Adam Scott back in the day when he used to struggle with his putting. That's how good of a ball striker he is. And weirdly enough, if you look at any single qualifying system of the Ryder Cup before 2018 when they changed it, he's on every single one of those teams. So like the fact that he wasn't mentioned in the conversations, I feel for him, because I'm just a coach. Like to me, it doesn't matter, but to him, you know, I feel for it because it's very insulting, and you know, it is what it is. It happens. He's gonna fight through it, and he'll be in many more conversations in the future years. So I'm not too worried about that. In terms of the growth with Yannick, you know, I started working with him right out of college, pretty much. Like he had just gone through Q school and gotten his PGA Tour Canada card when we started working together. And I met him out in Vegas one year. I was there for a golf school with Jeff Smith, actually, funny enough, and some other people. And back when Jeff was in TPC Summerlin. And I was there at the time, and Yannick came and met up with me, just a young German kid, excited to get better and really had a grind for it. You know, you can tell right away, like the players who just know so much. The biggest difference to me, the biggest tell that I see early on is when a player knows a lot about their game versus when they don't, honestly, because that tells me that he has done work and research, not for the YouTube type of information of what a good golf swing looks like, but more about himself and his tendencies. And he just has a very deep understanding of who he is as a player and what he's good at and what he's not good at. And he was sharing that information with me in our first ever lesson. And the fact that he was able to open up but also be so precise about what he was trying to communicate with me, I found that was very telling in how much of a good player he was and who he was going to be. And then over the course of the years, you know, we had a very passive relationship the first few years because I couldn't see him that often. It was through COVID. You know, I started working with him in 2000, and I think it was end of 2018. And, you know, a year in, we're having really good conversations. He's getting a lot better. He had improved on the PGA Tour Canada money list. But, you know, those tours, the mini tours, it's the get hot tour. If you're not winning tournaments, you know, putting up a bunch of 25s goes nowhere. I think in 12 events, our first year together, he put up 9 top 25s, and he wasn't even in the top 20 money list, like not even close, because it's so top heavy. But he was getting better, and he was just always asking the right questions. And then over time, I think he started to learn what makes Yannick as a ball striker. And, you know, even nowadays, I will say this, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're still going to have weeks where you're going to struggle with that. And, you know, when you put yourself in contention, and I'm sure Simon can attest to this too, like, man, it's really easy to want to take on shots you don't want to take on, and you want to flight the ball differently than you've been doing the last 3 days, and all of a sudden the wind direction switches, and it's like you feel like you need to completely overhaul your swing and your game and your ideas on how to attack the golf course, and your game can go down really quickly. And I think the growth that Yannick has been through over the last 3 years, and one of the things we really mastered is, outside of the technical stuff, because like the truth is, like, of course, technically he's gotten better over 4 years. That's something that every coach is going to put a lot of emphasis on. But if we're talking about Yannick, the player, I think he's gotten really good at understanding when he can play his style of game and when he can attack a little differently. And even now, there are moments where he gets in contention and he completely flips a switch in the wrong direction sometimes, where he feels like he needs to do something different. And honestly, I love the guy, but it happened yesterday too. You know, he's fighting for the tournament win yesterday and ends up finishing in 6th. Like, by all accounts, had an amazing week. But, you know, hits a couple of shots where, of course, the technical side maybe got a little loose. But then I'm sure there are certain mental decisions within there that he probably shouldn't have done, where, you know, he is a stock drawer of the ball. He is so good with his ball striking. Like, an average shot for him is going to be the 25 feet. Like, he's just that good. But then he feels like he needs to hit it closer because he's in contention and wants to make a birdie and forces the issue. And all of a sudden you're short-sighted and make a very, let's call it, lazy bogey, you know. And these are things that he's reduced over time because he's grown as a player and started to learn about those things. But every once in a while, even the best in the world, I want other people to realize that even the best in the world are going to make those mistakes every once in a while. But as you get better as a player, you learn to reduce those mistakes more and more. And he's still growing. It's only his second year in Europe. You know, he's going to get better at that. I will say this, and I'll jump to the other side of the spectrum. Steven and I have an entirely different relationship. And I think that's the fun part of working with tour players, is you can't treat them obviously the same. And we're going from an up-and-comer who it's a second year on the European Tour, and he's just getting his, let's call it his feet wet in terms of like the highest level of professional golf. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Stephen Ames, who reaches out to me, who is a Canadian Hall of Famer, who has won the Players' Championship, who has done everything there is to do in the game and has played on the PGA Tour for 20 years. And now he's coming to me in the back nine of his career. And he already has been there, done that. So our relationship obviously is not about trying to play Stephen golf, because he knows what Stephen golf is. For us, it's purely a technical relationship. You know, Stephen and I, he wants to be better. He wants to work within what his body capabilities are as he gets older. He wants to learn what he can do and what he can't do. And he wants to learn more about the technical side, because he's been historically a field player and he's had some great coaches. He worked with Sean Foley for a while, but at the same time, their relationship wasn't maybe overly intense on the technical side. And I think Stephen wanted it that way when they were working together. But as he gets older, he wants to know more of that knowledge. So when I'm standing on the driving range with Yannick, it's small little cues and feels that allow him to improve his mechanics when we're in tournament weeks. We're not getting overly technical. But when I'm working with Stephen, it's the entire opposite conversation. It's like he's asking me super detailed technical questions on things based on his body capabilities. And we have literally never spoken about how to attack a golf course in 5 years working together. Like, we don't talk about that because he knows how to do it. And he's at a point where he doesn't need me to tell him anything in that regard. First of all, I've never played professional golf, right? So already we have a very different understanding of what it takes to play at that level. But then at the same time, he knows his game inside and out, and he knows when he can take on certain shots and can't. So our conversations are just not so much about the personal growth side like they are with Yannick. They're more about the technical side, and I need the club to be doing this. What are the ways in which I can do that for my body? So just very, very different approaches.
What do you think drives someone like Stephen? He's been around for a long time. He's been there. He's done it. To still want to play, to still want to get that extra out of himself and still win. I mean, you can't be competitive. But what do you think it is that drives him? Because he could say, I don't want to play anymore and live the rest of his life very happy. What do you think it is that drives him to get that little bit extra out from himself?
I honestly think it's more of just like the internal athlete inside him that knows that he can still win tournaments against a fair competition. And he just loves the feeling of winning and wants to replicate that as often as he can until he decides that he no longer can fight for those W's. Stephen is not the type of person, in my opinion, who's going to be there just playing a fun tour just to rack in top 20s and make some passive income. Like, he's got his money, his life is set in stone. Like, he doesn't need any of that. You know, I don't think if he wasn't earning $1 at these events, I'm sure he would still play occasionally in some of them, because he honestly just loves the feeling of winning. And frankly, he doesn't need the money. I mean, let's be realistic, right? So it's one of those things where, for as long as he can still compete, that little inner child, like competitive child in him, I think is still shining nice and bright, and he just wants to win tournaments. And honestly, I think he'd be the first to admit that, like, he always felt like he could have won more than he did on the PGA Tour. You know, he's got 4 or 5 wins on the PGA Tour. He won the Players, but never played in a President's Cup, because the year he won the Players was a Ryder Cup year and it didn't carry over. And wasn't chosen. And, he never won a major. He never contended really for like a win in a major in a final round, like heading into the back end of Sunday. Like, he didn't have certain things that I'm sure he would admit he would have liked to achieve. And so the fact that he's able to not only compete against the Champions Tour players, but like win and dominate the tour like he's doing this year. He's always been a good ball striker. You guys talk about the 1% podcast. Like, I've literally got him just a little bit better. It's not like I've taken Stephen and overhauled his mechanics. His DNA at this point is pretty set in stone for his age. But if we can just make those tiny little changes to get him even to that next level, it's all about him. Because if I'm being honest, if I was in his position, I don't know that I would necessarily have the drive to keep wanting to play. I probably wouldn't. Sit back and enjoy your life with your wife and hang on a beach all day sounds way more exciting to me at that age versus needing to sit on a plane, like, as often as he does, and in hotel beds. And like, yeah, it's fun to compete, but like, he's done it for 25 years. He doesn't need to keep doing it. I honestly think it's within him that he made that decision because he knows he can still win and he wants to.
Taste that success as well. It's hard to let go, isn't it? Especially with somebody like him and his mentality.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind. Like I said, that's why it comes back to the fact that if he wasn't able to keep winning, I don't think he would still be competing at that age, personally.
Yeah.
Talking about that, when you're living by yourself and traveling on tour, and even yourself when you travel around with your players. How do you manage that as a professional with your kind of work-life balance, and how do you successfully see that working for those players?
So I will say this, I think you have to have a super strong support team around you, because it can be mentally taxing to be by yourself that often. You have to have an extremely supportive partner, because if not, it's only going to weigh you down. I think that you have to be very structured in your routine. I see some guys going to tournaments and the entire 3 practice rounds, they're having late night dinners somewhere. They're going to sporting events. Like, those things are fun. It's an exciting part of being a professional, because you have the ability to travel and see new cities. But one of the things that makes Yannick so different and so much more talented than a lot of these players is the fact that he's so structured. He's finishing his practice rounds. He has a very organized, diet of what he's eating. He goes back to the hotel room and he's relaxing and he's taking in the information that he needs to take in from the day, but he's not overwhelming it, and he's not going to bed late, and he's getting a proper sleep system, and he has his morning workout routines. Like, to me, all of these things keep him mentally and emotionally healthy. And I think that part is very important. You need to have the right nutrition. You need to have the right amount of sleep, because if not, that stuff starts to weigh on you. And when it weighs on you physically, it's going to start to weigh on you mentally. It's only a matter of time before those 2 barriers are going to get broken down, and there's going to be a lot of overlap there. When I tore my ACL, for example, I was miserable mentally the first couple of months, but it's because I was miserable physically. Like, again, it overlapped there, right? So I think that having that structure and that routine keeps you very in it, and then having your support staff being very strong and communicating with the right people. Yannick is a very big family person. He talks to his brother every day, who competes on the Corn Ferry Tour. Like, they have a very close relationship. They share their thoughts and ideas about the game of golf. But also, it just keeps him sane, because he's still communicating with people that he cares with. And I think that helps a lot. Me, for example, when I'm traveling, I bring my wife to a lot of tournaments, or I bring my brother to a lot of tournaments, or I bring a family member to a lot of events, honestly. And even if they can't physically be standing next to me the whole time, they're not only getting the experience of everything, which is fun, but for me, it's someone that I'm sharing the experience with. I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't be half as happy traveling to all these events if I wasn't able to share it with someone. Because for me, I'm a big family person. Like, I grew up with an Italian background. My name is very Persian. My father's from Iran, but my mom's Italian. And most of my family in Montreal are Italian. So I grew up with a very Italian kind of culture where you're very close to your friends and your family. And to me, that's what keeps me sane when I'm traveling a lot. So it's hard to be by yourself all the time. And the truth is, I wouldn't be able to do it. And I don't know that I have the same level of structure when it comes to what I'm eating and how often I'm sleeping to be able to do it. So I get that support system from my wife and from my family and my friends. He gets it from the structure of what he's eating and how well he sleeps. And he puts the right nutrition in his body to stay that way. And then he communicates with everybody else. And I think it really helps.
I think we just tapped into something there. You talked about rest and heart rate variability, recovery, nutrition. Someone like Yannick, I could see him doing all that. He's German, they're very efficient in what they do. I've played against them for years and they all do very similar things. But it's just so important, isn't it? Getting the rest. And that's what I don't think a lot of people understand.
It is crazy how much you wake up and feel different, both internally here and internally there, and internally all over your body when you're sleeping poorly. I have dealt with poor sleep for years. I've been waking up through the night for the last 10 years. And when I wake up after having a proper amount of sleep, it's like an entirely different person. You're energized at 8 o'clock in the morning when you sleep well, versus if you sleep poorly, your body only starts to fire on all cylinders by the time lunch rolls around. Well, that is a 5-hour window now where your body is no longer effective, which is then going to remove time that you can be effective with what you're trying to do professionally with the golf swing and compete. And now one of your 2 rounds, because you're going to have an afternoon wave and a morning wave, is going to be chalked, as the kids say, right? It's going to be like you're going to be in trouble because your body's not quite firing on all cylinders because you didn't get the right amount of sleep. So I think having that is a massive game changer, arguably more so at the professional level than it will be for recreational golfers. Because for recreational golfers, there are other factors in there that are going to limit them from playing good golf. Oftentimes their technique is just not very good, or they don't practice properly, or whatever other reasons there are. When you're dealing with professional golfers, most of them are practicing really efficiently. most of them have a really good understanding of their golf swing, and to some degree they have really good mechanics to get there, or just very, very good skill, let's say, to overcome the deficiency in the mechanics. What is going to separate them at that level? It's going to be everything on the external side, right? And that comes with sleeping well, eating well. And I think that's what the Germans do arguably better than anyone from what I've seen personally.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the health and what it takes from a human perspective to do it. For yourself, obviously you've been a golf coach for over a decade. You've coached for countless amounts of years and an expert now in your field. So what has been your biggest learning resource or learning experiences that you feel have contributed most to you getting to where you're at? And not only getting to where you're at, staying at the front of where you're at.
I honestly think, like, it's going to sound a little cliche, it's being able to get outside my comfort zone. You know, I put myself in situations where I didn't feel overly comfortable, but that's the only way in which I knew I was going to grow. You know, I had to film myself on camera, and I'm somebody who, when I was growing up through high school and college, I was an extremely fast talker, like to the point where people would catch me sometimes almost like, you know, stuttering or murmuring or, you know, really struggling to enunciate correctly because I just wanted to get everything out there. I think part of it honestly had to do with, like, as a kid, I was with a very, very talkative family. You're having dinner. If you don't whip out your message, you're never going to get your point across. And that's how we used to communicate with each other. You know, everybody wanted to be the one to talk over each other. So I just developed like a really fast speaking, you know, when I was a kid. So putting myself in front of the camera and then learning, wow, I'm extremely uncomfortable, but also I'm talking so fast. I don't know how a human can possibly understand anything I'm saying. And I think my growth over the years was putting myself on social media, getting my information out there in a way where, let's be real, when you're starting out this process, maybe some of the information isn't 100% accurate, or maybe the information isn't 100% scientific, but also, if somebody comes back to you with follow-up questions, or there's going to be trolls on the internet, for example, you have to defend yourself. Well, if you're not super confident in the information you're sharing, you're going to struggle to defend yourself. And I think the more you put yourself in those situations, from me being very uncomfortable and forcing myself to talk slowly, I used to rewatch all of my videos 10 times over when I would film them, honestly, before I shared them on social media. I think that made me a much better communicator. I still talk fast. I'm well aware of it. But in comparison to what I was 15 years ago, I mean, we're talking about two entirely different communicators. And I think that's been my biggest growth, is putting myself in situations where I need to be better and learning and understanding where I'm not good enough, and then just working really hard on making them better. At the end of the day, hard work is going to supplant everything you do. And so, you know, putting myself in front of the camera made a massive difference. Sharing my information on the internet made a massive difference. Doing these public presentations made a massive difference. You know, even just doing Coach Camp 4 or 5 years ago, you're sharing your information with all of these amazing coaches and, you know, engineers and all of these smart people who have studied the game so well. I mean, that's a lot of people who are going to be judging the information you're going to be sharing. If you're not 100% confident in what you're saying, you're going to have a hard time. So it's little things like that that I think over the years I've just put myself in situations where, what's the worst thing that happens? You fail and you get back up. It happens. Man, I've had professional golfers drop me as a coach. Everybody will. I've had recreational golfers drop me as a coach. I topped the ball the first time I gave a clinic. Like I said, I failed. You know, I've done it. So you put yourself in very uncomfortable positions and you're just going to keep growing. And I think that's the one thing that I've been thankful enough to put myself in those spots and like really get through it and get onto the other side of it.
Definitely failing for me is
agreed.
Yeah, the number one resource to getting better at whatever you're doing. If you fail and you learn from it, you learn more than you do when you win and you succeed.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, I think that's the one area where I've been fortunate enough to put myself in, because honestly, there's a lot of people who don't have the courage to get to that side. And this kind of leads back to one of the earlier points we made. You know, I had this like narcissism about my skill level as a soccer player. I probably had that same narcissism about my skill level as a golf coach when I started. Let's be real. It probably carried over to some degree. I had this like level of confidence that maybe probably I shouldn't have had, but that ignorance led to me being good enough to get noticed. And then from there, I put the work in to get myself more uncomfortable to keep growing from that. But you do have to take that leap forward at some point. And a lot of people, I see them waiting because they're uncomfortable or they're afraid to do it. I started this mentorship program like Alex, you, right? And I train a lot of these like up and coming coaches now. And it's amazing how many of them, and I would argue like 80% or more, are so uncomfortable to put their information out there and to put themselves in front of a camera and talk. And they want to be such a successful coach, but a lot of these guys or women live in these small towns. There's only so many people you can teach locally. At some point, we have the ability to advertise for free. Never in a point in our life have we had this opportunity to freely advertise ourselves. Wouldn't you want to take advantage of that? It doesn't even cost you $1. So it's one of those things that I always try to like train them and push them to be better and communicate. And I'm even willing to watch their videos to tell them where they can go wrong or be better before they publicize themselves. And even then, a lot of them are really afraid to take that leap. So I think, like, don't get me wrong, I put myself in that situation and I came out of it and I'm very thankful. But part of it is like, I'm almost more grateful for the fact that I was even able to put myself in that situation to begin with, because a lot of people don't have that ability.
I always say to players about who are kind of afraid to fail. Imagine how, if you were a child and you had an adult's mentality, you'd never learn anything, would you? Because as a child, you fail, you get on again, you try again until you get it. But we seem to lose that when we get a little bit older. What do you think that is?
I think it's the fact that we're ignorant as kids. You don't, the fact that you're going to fail as a kid doesn't matter because you don't understand what that actually means. You're just going to get up and do it again because you're a child. When you get older, you start to learn what consequences are and what, let's say, like, if you fail, it matters or it means a lot more. You lose that like childhood ignorance as you get older. And I think it matters a lot more. I'll give you a prime example. I'm not somebody who's the best flyer. Like if in an ideal world, I wouldn't travel like on planes because I'm just not a good flyer. I get anxious when I fly. But to be honest, I used to travel all the time when I was a kid and it never mattered. And as I got older, I've actually developed that fear more because I understood the consequences of what they are, even if they're so minute and it means nothing in reality, right? Like it's really not something to be afraid of. But internally, as I got older, I started to learn more. And I think I lost that childhood ignorance and I started to become anxious from it. So when you're a kid, you fail, you get back up. You don't even really know what fail means. And you don't really understand the consequences of what failing is. So you just want to do it again. But then you get older and you start to say, oh, what if I put my information out there and I fail? You feel internally as though you're not going to be able to recover from it. You probably will, let's be realistic, right? Unless it's something drastic. But at the same time, I think it's that ignorance when you're a kid that helps a lot. So I agree with you, where if you had the adult mentality when you're a child, I don't think it's the best thing for you. In fact, I think it's actually worse.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about being the child and the ignorance, a lot of the time for golfers is good as well, right? If you relate it to, ignorance is bliss, they say a lot of the time, because you can definitely get through situations a lot easier when you're a little more ignorant to what's going on around you.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I also think, if we're going to relate this to the playing side from what I've learned, and then I'll let Simon kind of speak up, being a competitor himself, like knowing too much about the golf swing isn't always a good thing. People always say like, oh, how can I trust a coach who can't beat his tour players? First of all, if I was good enough to play, you don't think I'd be playing instead of teaching? Like, how much more money do you think there is in playing than teaching? Like, that's real. And it's more enjoyable, right? Most people, the truth is, they would take the playing career over the coaching career, in my opinion. And a lot of people can say otherwise. I don't believe them. But also, when you know so much, if I just stood there for 8 hours and gave lessons about 8 different topics, you think I'm going to be able to stand over the golf ball now myself and actually find a way to clear my mind and hit the ball? Like, odds are I'm probably going to be thinking about the things that I just told all of these students, whether consciously or subconsciously. It's going to affect my movement pattern. And then I'm going to be thinking of, oh, you know what? My swing kind of reminds me of this player that I just worked with, and he kind of did something like this. I should try this and see if it's actually going to help myself. And every single coach has done this at some point. Yeah. And the truth is, it never works out in your favor because odds are your swing never really gets better. And the truth is, we don't invest enough time to get better. But we all go through that, right? And I think that being a player, I wouldn't say it's important to be ignorant. I would say it's important to be ignorant to things that don't matter to you specifically. When you're able to actually like filter out the information of what matters for your own golf swing and what doesn't, I think that's where professional golfers shine the most. That's what I try to advocate as a coach, is like, I don't want you to not have any information at all. I just want you to be aware of your own golf swing and how it works and why it works. And when you're going to hit a shot in a tournament, I want you to understand why that's happening in your specific case, subjectively. But you don't need to know why someone else's swing works or what field they're working on, because that stuff doesn't matter at all. And you don't need to be watching YouTube videos on very generalized information about stuff 99% of the time and expect that to actually make you a better golfer. So I think that like you need to have awareness about your swing. I think you need to have the understanding about your swing, but being ignorant to everything else and being able to filter that other stuff out, I think it matters a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I worked with Pete Cowan 26 years. There was a few things wrong with my swing. I didn't have the picture perfect swing, but we didn't really care about them because when I got in my delivery position, it was always the same every time, and it was exactly where I wanted it to be. So he wasn't going to say, oh, you do this on your backswing and we'll change that, because it might have changed the part of it that was good. So we just kept it really simple.
And to be honest, it's probably better. There are certain players who prefer to keep it simple. There are certain players who don't. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I think the best coaches in the world are going to be able to treat those players very differently when they're in that setting. But also, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to professional golf, like the people looking from the outside, these guys got to certain levels, yourself included, with a very specific movement pattern. I'm not going to stand here now and pretend as if your movement pattern is not good enough to play professional golf. You got there with that swing. So why would I stand here and make everybody look like Adam Scott for the sake of like Instagram resharing and stuff like that? Like the truth is, I'm trying to take your pattern. Why does it work? What are the subtleties within your pattern that are going to make it go off track when it doesn't work? How can we try to reduce those things so that they happen less and less often, right? But you see these people on the internet commenting from the outside of like, oh, his swing, why would Will Zalatoris have wrist angles that do that? You think I'm going to take Will Zalatoris' golf swing and start getting him to go like this with his wrist angle in transition because everybody else has to do it, let's say, when he clearly like loses the wrist this way? You can work on that all you want, but the truth is he's a top 25 player in the world not doing what everybody else is doing. You're not going to magically change one of the most important parts of his entire swing mechanics. And even if you do, it's going to happen over the course of 5 years, not over the course of 2 weeks, where you can just take a player and magically change something, And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is like at your level, we're not trying to overhaul your pattern. We are just very simply trying to make these finite changes that can help you get that 1-2% better, so that if you hit 5 bad shots with your with your driver over the course of a tournament, we can reduce that to 3 the next time. I mean, that's a 2-shot difference. That 2-shot difference is a half a shot scoring average over the course of a tournament week. That is massive by the end of the year. It's these little details that matter so much at the professional level.
It's faults and characteristics, right? And it's something that you do very well, and a lot of the elite coaches do very well, is they leave the characteristics alone and identify the faults and get those better.
100%. And I think that, it's really easy for these up and coming coaches to fall into the trap of like wanting to get every single player to do the same thing. That's why I kind of hate the idea of method teaching. What I always tell people is like, there's a big difference between being a method coach or a model coach and having personal preferences. Every single golf coach on the planet is going to have preferences. It's impossible not to have a preference. Just like as a player, it's impossible not to have a preference in how you want the ball to curve or what trajectory you like to see it come out of. Like everybody's going to have preferences. The best coaches are able to differentiate when they can teach those preferences and when they can't. And there is a lot of situations, especially with professional golfers, where you cannot get them to fall within the model of where your preference is, and you have to work away from it, but you can still make them better. Of course, in an ideal world, if I had a blank canvas, I would make everybody swing the way that I believe to be the most efficient way to swing the club, but that's just not the reality of it. And I think that being able to separate those two is where the best coaches shine, in my opinion.
And that's the whole part of being at the top of your profession versus having somebody like an amateur is just beginning their journey. You can put your stamp on them, whereas the elite have already got that stamp already imprinted firmly on them.
Yeah, and truth is, I was at that stage when I started, just like everybody is. When you have such a limited amount of information about the golf swing, you're going to try to teach that limited amount of information to every single person you work with because that's all you know, right? I mean, when I first started teaching, let's say 12, 13, 14 years ago, I was just strengthening everyone's grip or bowing the wrist and getting everybody to hit slinger draws because that's the way you combated a slice back then. Now, as you learn more, you understand the importance of the setup and the transition and all these little details on all of these variables that weren't really talked about as much back in the day, that now you can find 40 different ways to correct the slice. Back then, it's like there was 2 ways to do it. Hey, the grip looks so weak. Let's strengthen the crap out of it. Let's shut the face down and keep the back to the target. And everybody's going to get rid of a slice doing that. But, I mean, how many people are we teaching that to now? Realistically speaking, I probably do that to less than 1% of the players that I work with. Yeah. And I'm still correcting their slices of just doing it. And, we've learned over time to be more efficient. But I didn't have that knowledge at the beginning. I think you grow as a coach and you get to that point.
I want to flip back to when we're talking about the college system. You've had Yannick come through. You've taught Dylan Wu. He was at Northwest Uni where Luke Donald went. To keep churning these world-class players who come out of college and they win early on. What is so good about that system? Because we look at it from the UK and we're like, why haven't we got something in place like that in the UK? What is it in the college system that you think just literally works?
I think the biggest difference, honestly, is the coaching our tour caliber coaches when it comes to the mechanics that are working with these players every day when they're in college, and they get them such a good understanding. Like, I'll give you an example, just using Dylan and Luke. Dylan and Luke both still work with Pat Goss on their short game. Pat Goss is one of the best short game coaches on the planet. I mean, he's proven this time and time again. I mean, Luke Donald is a top 5, top 10 short game player of all time, right? Well, Pat Goss doesn't just exclusively work with tour players kind of and does his own thing. He's still the head coach of the team. So any single person who's coming up now not only has access to Luke Donald whenever he's there, but has access to one of the best short game coaches on the planet who's directly communicating with these players every single week. And I think that stuff makes a big difference. You see that with JC Deacon out in Florida. There's so many like really, really, really good coaches. And I think it's the coaching, honestly, more than anything. And of course, at the end of the day, it's not just the coaching, it's everything that it entails, which means it's the coaching, it's the networking that you get within the coaching, which gives you access now to tour players that you can talk to. And that gives you a better insight into what it takes to become professional at an early age. It's all of that together. I think that the entire networking and coaching package just opens so many more doors and deeper understanding that makes these players better and better prepared. And that's why you see a lot of guys from Europe jump ship where they go to the US for college for that exact reason.
The level of competition as well, I mean, is insanely good, isn't it? Division 1, you're coming up against guys who you're going to be coming up against on the PGA Tour. So I think that helps at an early age as well.
I mean, you couldn't get back in the day, like I want to say like 15, 20 years ago, you could get through a Monday pre-qualifier shooting 4 over par. I mean, if you're not shooting 4 or 5 under now, you're not even sniffing getting through a pre-qual, let alone the Monday qualifier. You see guys missing the Monday qualifier shooting 8 under. I mean, it's a joke, right? So I think the game has gotten so good. I mean, the Division 1 scoring average over the last 10 years has been reduced by like 3, 4, 5 shots. Like, it's a significant improvement, and probably the biggest improvement we've seen, even as a trend. Like, it's almost exponentially gotten better. So I think a lot of that has to do with the coaching side, the understanding with the advances of TrackMan and just all of this 3D capture that we can get. It allows coaches to take a deeper understanding of the golf swing as well. And then, the networking and the resources and everything else that you have access to has also gotten better. It just makes players so prepared. And honestly, a lot of these college kids, they're playing against these tour players for fun and practice rounds during the week on these tour players' off weeks a lot of times. So it's like they already have access to the best players in the world before they even become a professional. So they see what these guys are doing, and it makes a big difference. Whereas back in the day, there was clearly a massive divide between those two areas. You would occasionally have certain players that would cross over, and you have the Tigers and all that, but like few and far in between.
Yeah, I mean, you've got players like now that it's really good, in my opinion, the college system where they have the PGA Tour U, where you obviously get the guys that go out and they get their starts and they get their cards. You can look at Ludwig Aberg, that's obviously made the team and doing well in Ryder Cup, and I think his success and how he's gone from college level, elite level, playing Ryder Cup 4 months later, I think that's a testament to how good the college system is in America.
And it's only going to get better. I mean, let's be real. As good as it is, we're going to look back in 10 years and say that at this point, it was a joke compared to what it's going to be in 10 years. Just like nowadays, we look back 10 years and think that it used to be a joke back then. I mean, it's just the natural evolution of, people always say like the technology has changed so much in the game in terms of like the equipment, but the equipment is such a small part of it. It's the equipment, it's the coaching, it's the preparation. It's, back in the days, these players didn't have a diet regimen. Like, it's everything together. They're just so much better prepared. And we see it everywhere. I mean, hockey players are more skilled now than they used to be. You have the Connor McDavids now who come out and he's the best hockey player in the world by a mile because he was just way better prepared. You see it in football. You see it literally in every sport.
Yeah, love it. I mean, I think it's part of your growth and part of your journey, isn't it, to get into the top level, and how everything, and you do a really good job of staying at the front of everything you do in terms of at the front of your industry. And I think that's what makes you so unique and makes you stay there, is you're always continuously learning, continuously trying to get better. And that's something that, is very, very rare, I think, in this modern day and age where things come very easily to you.
I mean, I'll relate this. Yeah, I'll relate this to kind of just the conversation we just had. If we look back in 10 years, we're going to think that the coaching 10 years ago was a joke, right? So if I'm very confident in my coaching now and I feel like I never need to learn or get better, 10 years from now, everyone's going to think that I'm the joke. And I don't want to be the joke when it comes to golf coaching. I want to be much better. And so the only way for that to be the case, you have to continue to learn and you have to continue to research and just evolve as a coach in terms of how you communicate, in terms of the level of understanding you have technically. And with the advancements in all of this technology and resources we have, you have to keep up to date with it or you're just going to fall behind.
So give us, if you can, one success story where it impacted you, whether it was you or whether it involved you, that meant something to you the most.
That's a really good question. I would say the biggest success story, honestly, for me to this day is Yannick. And the only reason why I always bring myself back to him is because I've seen Yannick's growth from somebody who came out of college with what I at the time thought was an average to below average golf swing. But not only has he improved technically, but as a player, I've seen him grow and have a better understanding. And he's gotten to a place where now the money he makes is legitimately life-changing. And it's easy to be really like have a cliche and like say like the recreational golfers where they've had life-changing experiences, and that's fun. But the truth is, you're going to have certain recreational players that are going to have a life-changing experience and it's amazing, but it's never life-changing money or lifestyle, right? Like it's a life-changing experience, but it's an isolated event. When it comes to Yannick, you're talking about the difference between making it and not making it. And that's the difference between going and selling insurance versus playing professional golf for a living. And being, realistically speaking, a millionaire who now is financially stable, is going to have their kids be financially stable, and it snowballs that way. And the fact that, it's fun to work with a Stephen Ames or a Kevin Chappell or these guys, but they're already successful. And no matter what I do or no matter how many tournaments I win, I'm not really changing their life. I'm making it slightly better than it already was. But when it came to Yannick, I saw him come out of college and I saw him grow to a point where he got to the level where it became a change to his life. And I think that for me, that's always going to be the biggest success story, because for me, he's the first person that I've taken to that point, from being somebody who had nothing and nothing relative to, financially, but also golf-wise, to somebody who now is in the top 100 in the world ranking and making life-changing money. So whenever I think of a success story, for me, it's always going to be him. And that's why I always have a stronger connection with him than everybody else, just because we've been through that kind of together.
Yeah, I love that.
And what a journey it's been and continues to be, right?
Well, that's the goal. But he had a chance to win last week and it didn't come through. I'm sure he's pretty pissed about it. So we're going to have a nice conversation this week.
Shauheen, you've been super kind with your time today. We appreciate you coming on, and thanks for for sharing with us. Just one more question, or what's a piece of advice or wisdom that has guided you through your career, or you'd like to pass on to anyone that's listening?
Just don't be comfortable. Don't be lazy and don't be comfortable. Like, at the end of the day, put yourself out there, put the work in, because if you fail now, no one's going to remember that you failed in 2 months. That is just honestly the reality. No one's going to remember next week. Put yourself out there and don't be afraid, because the truth is, man, people forget about stuff all the time, right? Like TikTok trends, things come and go super quickly. I couldn't even tell you what the last TikTok trend was 2 weeks ago, let alone what it's going to be now. So if I can't remember that, why would I remember in 2 weeks that you failed and tried again? Just keep doing it until eventually you're going to crack that barrier.
Awesome. Shauheen, appreciate it, bud. Thanks for hopping on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, boys.
See you soon, buddy.
Take care.